Please help me in joining Russ.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure, yeah.
So we were talking last night a little bit about your son discovering making art.
Mm-hmm.
What was your journey in finding your creative outlet? Were there any people that inspired you, or was it just from the get-go?
That's really, really interesting. So we had family friends. My brother's here too, and he could attest to this. We had family friends, and they had an older brother that was really into drawing roller coaster drawings and the Incredible Hulk drawings and things like that. And so I remember at a really young age seeing him doing these like Incredible Hulk drawings where they were like probably pretty crude by my standard now, but I remember seeing, oil paint on canvas when I was young and being like blown away by it. So much so that you go through this whole process, and then I get to undergrad and I was actually a sculpture major and I was doing really, really well. And then all of a sudden I feel like all of that kind of came back and I was like, I really want to know how to paint, like the whole creating illusion with paint on a two-dimensional surface was like really attractive to me. There was more magic to it. It seemed like sculpture was like really, really literal. It's very immediate, and there's something phenomenal about paint on canvas, and like there's a whole level of sort of magic to it that like I was really attracted to. So I think that still carries on today. There's just something about painting that has another worldly sort of element to it that isn't so physically here right now. That's more phenomenal and something else, So I'm still really attracted to those qualities of painting.
Yeah. So this show, loosely or very much inspired by the relationship between Andre the Giant and Samuel Beckett.
Uh-huh.
How did you first learn about this relationship?
Well, I think I learned about Andre the Giant and Samuel Beckett very separately. First, obviously, growing up in the 80s and 90s as like a little boy, like watching WWF and stuff like that, and like my brother, like laying out all the cushions and on the couch and like holding these wrestling matches and things. And then you go to school, you go to grad school, and you learn about Samuel Beckett and like, the theater of the absurd and how much of an intellectual he was. And then, so, I sort of have both of these realizations, and then I don't know how I came across it, but it's a very true story that when Samuel Beckett emigrated to France, he moved to this rural village, and he moved to next to Boris Rasimov, which is the father of Andrei Rasimov, and Andrei Rasimov is, of course, eventually becomes Andre the Giant. But when he was young, Samuel Beckett would give Andre the Giant a ride to school. Now, that's really all that's known. But there's all this rumor around, like, he was too big to ride the bus and all of these things. And there's like all this myth now all of a sudden. And, again, where sort of like factual history ends, this myth starts to begin, and that's really interesting. And that's like sort of what I was going after or sort of participating in, was these untruths that could be anything at that point. And then my version of it is basically these relation of objects and things like that. But it also calls into question sort of like low art of professional wrestling and then the high art of Samuel Beckett and all of these things. But when you really start to like, dig into both of them as important things, and although, like this professional wrestling is like really lowbrow, it's still really important, and whether you like it or not, it's very, very important. And then to have that sort of coexist with like Samuel Beckett and like him writing like these, plays, like the theater of the absurd and things like that. He's renowned as this intellectual, but you get into like what Samuel Beckett was writing, and it's also very hilarious and very absurd. It's also performance based, and professional wrestling is performance. Like it's at first they're these polar opposites, which is super interesting. But what like sort of solidifies it is when you look at both of them, there's all these really like great similarities as well too. So that was really, really interesting. But the room to sort of expand and make up any story that I like is really exciting. And essentially that's what I think art is all about. You start making up these mythologies about, what that was like. And again, like I said, as far as I'm concerned, it's a mythology of objects and formal relations and versus like conceptual things. So it starts off as like polar opposites, which is exciting. And then it solidifies itself with like all these commonalities that are really interesting to me, how substantial it is. Yeah.
So did you have a Stretch Armstrong as a child?
Yes, of course I did. And I cut it open.
I did too. I did not cut it open.
Okay, yeah. Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. Yes, that's a good question. Yeah.
So, I mean, all of this lore around their relationship, what sort of inspired you to make then this show surrounding that narrative?
So, yeah, it's a good question because the sort of painting that I was trained to do is like realism, and it's very closely connected to narrative painting. But I found narrative painting like kind of troublesome because you're sort of like expected with like realism and things like that to sort of like pursue narrative painting in the style, and I mean, quite honestly, it's fucking boring after a while. You're just like, okay, I'm gonna illustrate another story. So for a while, I was like coming away from that and exploring more conceptual things with other artists that I went to school with and exploring other territories. And I got really excited and inspired about taking this like sort of form of pictorial painting and exploring other things and saying like, hey, like as like a realistic painter, can I explore conceptual territory? And you think it's so easy, but like, when you're being taught by certain professors and things like that, they want you to sort of stick to that camp of painting. And I really resisted all of that. So I come full circle around and you start saying like, okay, I've explored this conceptual territory, like I'm a realistic painter, but I'm really into like Richard Serra and like Erwin Wurm and like Fischli and Weiss and like all of these, more conceptual, contemporary sort of thinkers in art. And I've come full circle to like narrative painting and saying like, okay, well, in this case, narrative is interesting again, because not only is it completely unexpected, this relationship between Andre the Giant, it's like rebelliously unexpected, these sort of two characters that existed in real life and occupied the same space. But now I can also sort of like play up this myth and again, like I was saying before, the fact that there was like a lot of like untruths about it. Like people just start making stories up about like what they did together and what they talked about, and you can play in that realm then of make believe, and that was interesting to me. So I did my exploring of all these other realms, and this was a good way for me to make peace with narrative painting again and sort of bring narrative back to the painting, because it's interesting to me. It's not like I'm painting pictures of another story. It's the relationship of the images and objects that I'm putting together in the same circumstance that become the narrative.
And really, I mean, are you sort of expressing the narrative or rejecting the narrative?
I'm no longer rejecting the narrative, not with this show. I'm embracing it, but I'm rejecting illustration, which I've always done, I think, because of the camp of painting that I've come from. I feel like there's a lot of pressure to illustrate someone else's narrative. And I was really attracted to all of the abstract expressionist ideas of the painting is the narrative, right? Like, so we talk about the Renaissance and, oh my God, Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo and the Sistine Chapel, like all of these things, but they were put to work to express someone else's idea, right? So you get into like Jackson Pollock and all those things, and learning that the painting itself and the way that painting is constructed is the story was a really exciting concept, and it still is to me, so it's process-driven narrative that's like, okay, let's put these things in the same space and see what it does. Much like that piece over there, it's like really interesting to me that like, it's not about that X painting or the block itself. It's the relationship between those two objects and forms that create this concept. So it becomes important in and of itself, as opposed to illustrating something else that's outside of it. And I think that's where you could really elevate the art process, as opposed to making the art process sort of serve something else. It seems more exciting to make the process itself the narrative.
Well, so you touched upon that piece, which is sort of one piece with two pieces in it, and the cinder block is the giant.
Yes, it's the figurative element in it.
The figurative element. So the X, therefore, I would assume is
the
Beckett,
theory,
or the theory, or the absurd.
Sure, yeah.
So I think it's funny because the absurd part of that piece is probably the constructed cinder block.
Well, yeah, and that's sort of like the beauty in this whole situation between Samuel Beckett and Andre the Giant is that it wanes back and forth, I consider the block the giant. I consider sort of the marks in these paintings, or like the figurative element in it, right? And the sort of like the character, I guess, that has this thing in the background that sort of lifts it. But yeah, it goes back and forth as well too. You could look at the X as like the figurative element. But yeah, to me, the block is always kind of like the giant, but it changes in that too.
Yeah, because then the giant is holding up the giant, and then is Samuel Beckett being held up by Andre?
Yeah, it goes back and forth, and I really like that. I like the blurring of the line, and again, like I said, even just like the idea of like you have this intellectual playwright versus this professional wrestler who's like rumored to drink like 2 cases of beer in a sitting, and it's like all these like sort of crude stories. But when you really break them down, not only were they both important, but like there's this like sort of blur that happens, which I think is really interesting. So it's not like this one-dimensional move. It blurs back and forth, not blurry so much to be confusing, but like it switches roles, and there's a more it brings like a phenomenal perspective, like who's more important, the giant or the playwright? And it's like, well, they're both important. They're both very much important, and they need each other to sort of bounce off of one another. And it really just comes down to the conversation and the circumstance that I'm super interested in.
So of all the paintings that are in here, is there one in particular that sort of speaks to their relationship the most to you?
Yeah, so this piece over here, definitely, like I really love it as a painting because it was also a triumph for me. Technically and practically day to day to paint that stack of tires is really, really difficult to get the ellipses. And like from a technical standpoint, I really, really like it. But I really love the figurative quality, like sort of once you pull it off realistically and you're like, okay, it's convincing tires. Conceptually, I really like that form. It's just like the idea of the tire and like the material of rubber and how it's sort of firm and industrial, but also like malleable. It sort of occupies 2 different worlds at the same time, which I've always been really, really interested in. But actually occupying 2 things at the same time is interesting to me. So even just the materiality, but it creates this really beautiful like figurative element in it, and it's just as, it's nicer to me than a lot of like nude paintings or nude drawings and like nailing the anatomy. All of the realistic techniques that I learned, figure drawing and things like that, and all the technical successes that you get in like a figure drawing class, where you're like, I really nailed the anatomy with this one. It's the same exact thing. I feel like I just really nailed the anatomy, and I really just love how, this sort of like flat circle, which kind of represents like theory to me, like it's like theory versus practice. And there's the figurative element of the tires, and then just sort of like flat plane, which also takes a great deal of technical skill to pull off. Like to pull off a perfect circle in paint is an incredibly difficult thing to do. I don't care if you have a compass, if you're doing it with a string or however you do it, or you're doing it with a projector, it's still to paint it by hand. If it's not vinyl, it's really difficult to do. It really, really is, So I really like how that's like the most successful thing as far as like the conversation goes, and like the sort of exciting conversation between these 2 worlds that also like once you dig become very simple, a lot more similar than you think at first, so.
And maybe you could share with us a little bit about sort of the neon elements that are in all of the paintings?
Yeah. So, it's like kind of an elaboration of something that I was doing in like 2012, which started as like these duct tape things that I was doing, and I remember doing these figurative paintings because that's how I was trained. I was trained as like a figurative, realistic painter, which I embraced, but simultaneously like resisted at the same time because I just always wanted more. But I was working on a painting, and I was like working on the hand in this painting, and it was in a weird position, and I just couldn't get it. And naturally we're drawn to the face, so I started laying duct tape over the face because it was like the only thing I had because I don't have proper like artist tape, and I laid this like pink duct tape that I was using for like packing and other art pieces that I was making, and I just really loved what it did. And a friend of mine who most appropriately said it activated it. So like once you put this thing over this really nice realistic painting, it brings an activation to it, right? So like it immediately makes it like relevant in like a contemporary sense, and in because it brings something else, even if it pisses other people that look at it. Like if it pisses them off that look at it. And believe me, I've had that. I've had shows where like I was doing these like figurative paintings and then painting this like trompe l'oeil duct tape, and it looks so real that like it just upset people. They're just like, it was I remember doing shows. I would do shows in Martha's Vineyard with a friend of mine's gallery who was like letting me do solo shows and letting me do like experimental stuff, and I remember people, like this like New England crowd coming through and just wanting the thing that they know, and I would do the thing that they would know, and then I would interrupt it, and they'd get upset about it, and it was funny to me, it was funny because like I just enjoyed how much it fucked them up a little bit, and they were just like, well, it was, I remember one time I did a show and somebody's like, well, it's a nice painting until you did that. And it was like, I thought that was funny. I really thought that was funny. And then, you realize that like humor is another really important thing. So, I think I went beyond humor. Like, I don't think that any of the neon stuff is like humorous in like a mischievous kind of way, but it does activate it, and it also brings another form of like figuration to it. So, you could sort of do these really beautiful landscapes, and, from a human perspective, like what's a landscape if there's not some kind of figurative element in it, some kind of like interaction? And then when you start talking about like the sublime and things like that, it's like nature on its own without anything to witness it is like, I don't know what it is. It's just noiseless, I guess. It just is what it, it's this thing, but it's our interpretation of nature that makes it this like other like sublime thing, this huge thing that's like, it's an interaction, it's another conversation. So that it started a long time ago with some other things, and then it became, this sort of like neon gesture that's like also like the figurative element in the work. And I always kind of liked that play. Like if you were going to do a landscape or something based totally from nature, to put something over it, something for it to like, something to sort of interact with it, resist it or embrace it, was exciting to me. So that's kind of like what the neon stuff is. It's all just a figuration.
Yeah. It certainly relates back to like the 80s and like neon signs and Dan Flavin.
Yeah.
But I think my favorite part about the neon is the shadows that you put on the paintings.
Yeah. And we talked about it yesterday too, because you were like, I really love that painting, and we were talking about like why we thought like, and a lot of people love that painting particularly. And I love that you brought up Dan Flavin, because like honestly, like I think about him all the time, like so much to the point where I'm just like, instead of painting these neon lights, is it better to just attach a fluorescent bulb to the bottom of this painting and just let it be like what Dan Flavin did? And so, and also I'm so happy you said that name, because which is a tangent now, but so Dia Beacon is like an hour and 15 minutes from my hometown in Scranton, Pennsylvania. It's like right over the Hudson River, and like I made homages. Like we would go there several times, and I would go there as much as I could, and that was like another, like what I was saying before, is like a realistic painter who was being, like you go to grad school and there's a certain type of professor that sees a young male realistic painter, and they're like, oh, he's our guy. And as soon as I felt that vibe, I wanted to resist it, So then it was like Dia Beacon, I never wanted to get rid of the realistic painting and oil on canvas and all that stuff. I really loved it. And the figuration, like I really loved that like technical stuff. But I was always searching for something else outside of that, like sort of this phenomenal thing that was going to bring more to this, as opposed to like, yeah, I'm going to illustrate someone else's stories because I'm such a good realistic painter and boy, I can paint a picture. And it was like, you know, the process is the picture. So anyway, all the Dan Flavin stuff and all of that like color field light stuff is like still I think about all the time, and I wish I could do it that well. But I think anyway, I love Dan Flavin.
Well, I mean, I think outside of the super highly conceptual elements of the paintings, they're also very visually attractive. So, I mean, what role does beauty play into your work and in your thinking about artwork? Yeah,
that's a good question. And I remember having a specific moment in grad school where, you know, for you know, somebody who doesn't know, that's like the moment where you like really start digging, and you start really digging into the heady stuff, and you get a pride about like trying to investigate stuff that nobody understands, kind of, right? Like it's like all the art that everybody's like, what is this? You know, like you get a real pride in figuring that out, right? Like so, you know, when we were in grad school, like I really loved all of that, but there was something about like the art from the 70s, you know, I mean, really the 60s, 70s, you know, the whole conceptual thing where like they resist the image completely, which I never wanted to totally let go. I also felt like it was like sort of a rebellious act to say like, I want to make beautiful paintings. I want to look at beautiful stuff. Like I really want to look at beautiful things, and it's important. It's super important in the work. So, you know, to make a beautiful painting is a really big deal for me, you know? You know, I mean, to encapsulate it all, like I want to have my cake and eat it too. You know what I mean? Like I wanted all of it. Every time someone told me no, it just made me want to do it even more. You know, right down to again being like a sculpture student and not knowing how to paint and saying like, well, I want to do this shit I don't know how to do. You know what I mean? Like I'm if I'm already doing this and being successful at this, what's the point? You know, it's like we talk about as well too. I have a good friend here too that we talked about. It's a really great point. It's like once you've answered the questions, what else is there? There's nothing. You know what I mean? So art is all about questions. It's about constantly questioning and constantly, you know, sort of like leaving open this asymmetrical situation, this non-prime experience. And I just constantly want to be at that, because if it's a prime experience and it's completely symmetrical and it's completely answered, okay, great, moving on. You know what I mean? Like it's done, it's completely dead. You've killed it. If you've answered all the questions, you've killed it and missed the point completely.
Well, and then you can start breaking the rules.
Exactly, yeah. So it's all about breaking the rules, right? Like there's a thrill in that. And so yeah, does that answer your question at all?
Maybe. So it's funny.
Maybe, I'll take a maybe.
Because rural and sort of country lifestyle is having a pop moment right now.
Yes.
So you must feel like really on trend with your pastoral.
I am, yeah, and I think I do. I feel very trendy with the whole pastoral vibe that I have going on. You know, meadows and flowers, baby, all the way. I'm all about it. Yeah, and I mean, you know, I think there's a reason. You know, I mean, I also have 2 small children. You know, like, and I'm very like family first in my day-to-day life. I'm very present with my 2 little boys and my wife as well too. And you know, we just recently moved back to Pennsylvania from Sarasota, and although it was bittersweet, you know, I mean, we live rurally now, and I don't know if, for me, I don't know if it's so much of a trend as like, and it may be still. I'm not denying that. That's great for me, right? Look how trendy I am, hiding away. Amongst the flowers. God, what a way of life.
Like Andre and Samuel.
Yeah, exactly. So like the same thing. Yeah, but I mean, yeah, I'm also I also grew up in like rural Pennsylvania. You know, like I feel like that's always been sort of part of what I tried to maintain in what I was painting. There's also like, you know, just the idea of staying close to nature, and that's another thing that sort of rings true in the headiest of conceptual art or abstract art, that, you know, you've you've ever seen, you know, if you get into like the idea of like what Hans Hofmann did and all that stuff, you look at it and you're like, you know, this is the most modern thing I've ever seen. You know, all these paintings are just like sort of color field abstraction, but like his whole thing was like based in nature. And that's another thing that I love too, is that like, you know, on the surface, all these abstract artists and conceptual artists, you know, like even like we were talking about Michael Heiser at Dia Beacon and stuff, and like, you know, he would dig a huge hole in the ground, and you're just like, what is this thing, this hole? Oh my God, it's like, you know, it evokes the sublime. You look at it and you're like, it's scary beautiful. Like you stand next to it and you're afraid of falling into it. And it's a hole in the ground, but it very much needs the ground. And he very much talked about that. And a lot of that like conceptual stuff was still very kind of like pastoral, and all that like land art stuff in the 70s was that like sort of link that I'm like really chasing after, was like, you know, these things aren't as separate as we think. So yeah, I mean, you know, it's nature and the land is just like a link between all of it. I mean, it's genreless, which I love.
Well, it's funny, you mentioned a few times that you started as a sculptor, and you say, you know, in your artist statement that you think like a sculptor, but you act like a painter.
Yeah.
So how does that sort of come across in the work and in your practice?
Yeah, so practically speaking, I was talking to Keenan about this yesterday, and, you know, very practically speaking, I have these like sculptural ideas, like this one for sure, like it's a sculptural idea. Like this is basically like a sketch for a sculpture to me, but I didn't have the space for it. You know, I don't have a sculpture studio. I can't practically make this thing and present it. So it was like, well, I know how to paint, and that's another thing about the painting, is that like, you know, it's twofold. It's like the theory of painting and the idea of painting, which is amazing. It's magical. But then there's the vocation. There's the skill and the trade of painting, which I think people overlook. You know, in history, we were talking about before, like the Renaissance painters in like the Sistine Chapel. You know, but like they were very much like masons or carpenters and or whatever. You know, I mean, it was their job. Like they could create things, and I think that was like an empowering thing as well too. So I mean, my thought process is based three-dimensionally. A lot of times my execution out of necessity is two-dimensionally based. Now again, like I said, I love the theory of painting. I love what a painting does after you're done with it, and just like sort of, you know really like analyzing color and you know, when you get into that realm, like Joseph Albers and all that stuff, it's just like, oh my God, it's pure theory. It's awesome, you know? I mean, it's all art nerd stuff, which is like, you could just bathe in it, you know? But, you know, my ideas often come and are in their conception are three-dimensional, and the execution is two-dimensional. But I think that way of thinking like a sculptor and acting like a painter brings magic and phenomenon to the work, you know? So it's not just like, well, I'm a painter. Again, like I was saying, you know, I'm a painter, I paint pictures, I illustrate things, and it's like, cool, what else? And, you know, like to think one way and act another way brings this sort of magic, you know what I mean? And it's like, you know, the magician who knows all the tricks behind the scenes, but you don't know them, so it creates this like really wonderful experience, this really literally magical experience where you're just like, oh, you know, I know magic doesn't exist, but that's amazing. You know, like when David Copperfield like made the Statue of Liberty disappear or something like that, and you're just like, oh my gosh. Even as an adult, you're just like, oh, what happened here? But there's all these things behind the scene that add to that illusion. And I think, again, thinking like a sculptor and executing like a painter adds this magic to it. And there's just like another like layer, and it adds like a subconscious to the work that's important. It's like meeting a person, and like you don't know all of their experiences, but they've gone through all of these experiences, good and bad, and then they present themselves to you, and you're like, I don't know why I like this person, but I like them. Yeah, I don't need to know their whole life story, but I like this interaction that I'm having with this person. And there's all these sort of like behind the scenes hidden things that add to the magic of any interaction and any experience. And I really like that, and I try to like keep that phenomenon to the work. I guess like to put it really like simply is this just like adds to a 360 degree view of one painting. You know, there's this like other thing behind it and around it that you can sort of experience it through.
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely with the newer pieces, the diptych over there and these two, like, you can imagine just kind of continuing to walk in that direction. And there's a lot of gesture and almost like negative space that you're bringing.
Yeah, and I appreciate you noticing that as well too, because especially that one back there, there's just, it's like, it's all negative space. It's like everything it's like you just painting around things constantly, you know, and it's just like a menagerie of negative space.
So you talked about how you paint multiple pieces all at once, so they can sort of talk to each other and talk back to you. How do you think that benefits your process?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think it comes from like a three-dimensional understanding, and you know, even down to like the way that I photograph my work, which probably goes largely unnoticed, but I never crop a painting. You know, every image on my website, even if it's just a three-dimensional canvas, like you could see a shadow, and like there's something about the object, you know, and I think that's another thing too that sort of gets lost in painting, is that like it's this thing on a surface, right? Like, so it's not, I mean, especially now with like computers and things like that, like you crop out all these other things, and it's like, I don't just it gets too flat, you know, and I think the object of the canvas is still interesting to me, you know, because underneath that, and I don't do it so much anymore just because it's just not, I could buy a canvas that's just as well built and I can make it, but for up until probably 2 years ago, you know, I was running all that stuff through a saw, beveling the wood, building the stretcher, and you know, they're quite literally behind the scenes is all this three-dimensional work and all of this three-dimensional building that I loved. You know, I loved building with wood and using screw guns and running saws and things like that. And then all the viewer sees is, you know, the pretty image that's on top of it. And on a certain level, it seems a little unfair. Like, I want them to know this, like, sort of other, this other thing to it as well.
Do you think that's why you leave the sides of the canvas unfinished?
Yes, I think so. And conversely, why I also like putting frames when I could do it if I could cut my own frame, because it's like this other wood, and that's another thing too, you know, like this sort of like trompe l'oeil faux finished wood thing was like also like indicative of like the process and like the DNA, like what's behind it. And like, or I really love photographing the paintings from behind and like seeing like canvas, wood, and like a graphite signature with a title on the back. I think that's really interesting. You know what I mean? It's like this structure that's built that's really, really precise as well too. I think which people kind of don't realize is how precise a stretcher has to be built, and the physicality of the actual support for you to even create this picture is like, you can't have the picture without the physicality of the support. I like that, you know, and I don't ever want it to get lost.
So bringing it back a little bit to the concept, Andre the Giant, wrestler, very popular. Wrestling is still very popular. Samuel Beckett, central to the theater of the absurd. Do you think that in 2025 we need a resurgence of existentialism or existential thought in society? Some
levels of it. I think there's a level of existentialism now that's terrifying. Truly, I think that, you know, certain, like, like social media, AI, all of those things, like, and of course, hopefully we'll all just be kooks. Like when they invented electricity and people are like, that's the devil, you know, like I hope that we're just all kooks and that like the next generation, especially as a father with kids, like you hope that they adapt more than they're just like, we're being overcome by all of these threats. And I honestly do think that. I think that, like, you know, so parts of it. So let me before I go on too far, I think yes, some of it. The dread of existentialism, the overall dread, and that's also why I like Samuel Beckett and the absurd, is because absurdity is a focusing of the existentialism, right? So you have like existentialism, and then within the existentialism you have the absurd, which you find humor. And all of these things that like elevate us sort of out of the dread, and it becomes less dread focused and more humor focused and things like that. And you know all about
mechanism.
Coping mechanism, yes. Like the humor of it. And you know all about Waiting for Godot. Do you know my favorite scene? We talked about it in Waiting for Godot. Can I talk about it while we're filming?
Please.
Yes, please. Okay, so the existentialism is terrifying as a whole, but again, the absurdity and the theater of the absurd and all of that, and so you all know, Christina did work that was based around Waiting for Godot, and I think this was all just a coincidence. It's really, really great, because it's kind of esoteric. Not everybody knows this, but there's a scene in Waiting for Godot, which I love, and it's hilarious. It's an excellent punchline. So Waiting for Godot is blah, blah, blah. These two characters, they're waiting for Godot, which is like God, because the existentialists believe that there was no God, there's no point to life, you just wait to die, right? But they didn't believe in suicide, so there's not this morbid option, right? Like, you don't have that option. The best you could do is sort of laugh. So there's a scene in the play where these two characters are waiting for this guy, and they discuss all of these things. They're like, well, what if he never comes? And like, well, we might as well just kill ourselves. So they start to, you know what, you're right. They used to go back and forth. They're like, you know what, you're right. Well, how are we going to kill ourselves? Well, look at this tree. Look at this beautiful tree. We can hang ourselves from this beautiful tree. And they're like, all right. And they discuss the rope, the sturdiness of the branches. Maybe this branch, is better than the other branch to hang ourselves. And we'll do it at the same time. And, we'll both kill each other. And they're like, oh, great idea. You've got it. They've pinpointed it. And then one of the characters brings up the fact that he goes, well, I've heard that when you hang yourself, you don't have to block his ears, it's fine. When someone gets hanged, they get an erection. And he says, an erection? Well, how embarrassing is that? And that's the only thing that prevents them from killing themselves in the play. And it's awesome. It's such a great punchline. We grew up, my best friends, my brother's here too, we grew up on humor. Please, this day we're pulling up making absurd jokes to one another. And it's such a big part of daily life and the coping mechanism. So to get back to what you're saying, I think that the existentialism needs to be recognized, and then I think the absurdity and how you can articulate humor in a really intellectual way really excites me. And coming back to the whole wrestling, the lowbrow thing, because we come to these openings, we go to these museums, and we talk politics, and I think when people stop laughing, they've missed the point, and you're doomed. You are doomed when you can't laugh anymore. And I think that it's beyond important. I really, really think that part of existentialism is the refinement, and the real elevation of existentialism, and the real elevation of meaning and humor and how much it brings and things like that,
Well, so you're also a professor.
Yes.
What sort of advice are you giving your students these days?
It depends. It depends. I guess at the end of the day, because obviously having students, there's students that want to and students that don't want to. And, I sort of get the students that don't want to are not really gonna take it that far, and you just try to give them some information that might enlighten them throughout whatever they go on to next. This is sort of just a stopover for them. But the students that want to do it, and the thing that has carried me through all of this is a real strong work ethic. And it seems so boring, but if you have an excellent work ethic and you just can work, and it's really empowering, and it's really and then at that point you don't have to impose any idea on them. You could say whatever idea you come up with, whatever it is, it's honestly none of my business what your ideas are, and they're also going to change and mutate and morph and progress and all of these things. So I wouldn't dare impose my ideas on what they should be doing, but if you can develop an excellent work ethic day to day, we were talking before too, it's one of my favorite quotes. Somebody asked Chuck Close what inspires him, and he just simply said, inspiration's for amateurs. The rest of us just go to work every day. And if you know Chuck Close, his au revoir is it's mind-blowing. These enormous, hyper-realistic paintings, where you're just they're amazing. And I think especially for artists and creatives in general, I think the biggest piece of bullshit that they believe, or that we all believe, that I do sometimes, is that number one, everything you're going to create is awesome. because it's not. You have to get a bunch of bad paintings out of the way to make room for, and that's a process, and it's a difficult process. And like you just need to work. Like you just need to work. And again, that's like if you're working, a lot of your days are working getting bad ideas out of the way, you know? And it's the truth. My God, I mean, like so many bad paintings that I've just like painted over where you're just like, and they're crap, they're just like garbage, but you just keep working and you just keep doing, and as long as you are a human with a body and hands and a mind, you know, you just keep doing and keep making and keep producing, and you just don't ever stop. It's just a really practical advice, I guess.
Sorry.
So no, please, you're still very much alive.
Well, so before we open it up for a little Q&A, number one, what do you hope the viewer walks away with after seeing the show? And number two, if Andre and Samuel were here, what do you think they might glean from the exhibition?
I wouldn't ever claim to get Samuel Beckett's approval because he's like a hyper genius. I don't know. I mean, I guess the same as like, you know, I think that's the great thing about these like human endeavors is that like you put so much work into all of this really just to either enlighten or just really make people happy when they see it. And even just talking about beauty before as like this thing that's like sort of scoffed at during like sort of different eras in art. And like, I think it's really important. Now, I mean, an elated experience and a nice experience is nice, but you know, I mean, you want to activate intellect and things like that. I don't want to isolate anybody either, ever. I have these very nerdy pursuits for sure, which we all do as artists, but like at the same time, I think the goal is to sort of invite others into the nerdy pursuit as opposed to like push them away, which is an interesting concept because any good movement in art is sort of based on pushing another one away, but I think it's more about pushing another movement in art away as opposed to other people. And I think even the most progressive movements, new movements in art are still very inviting to the audience and still very like generous, I think. So I don't know, you know, I mean, it's all based in it's all a bunch of work to offer generosity and like an inviting in as opposed to pushing out. I don't want to ever isolate anybody. I want to invite them in. You know, I very much love people, you know, and like things like that, you know, so.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, on that note, does anyone from the audience have any questions for the brilliant maniac over here?
Yeah, that's a good title. I'll take that. I'll take that any day. I'll take questions from him. I don't know. Oh, yes, yeah.
I have a question.
Yes, please.
I have a question about the text.
Yes.
So we love your figurative gestural movements.
Yeah.
But then this feels more projection to me. What inspired you to include text and the vinyl, which feels like it's being projected against the vinyl?
Yeah, that's a great question. They're two different things. I think the text and the vinyl are two different things, but also like part of the same experience. Number one, the text. I've always really loved the text. Looking at things like Ed Ruscha and John Baldessari, which is like, he's like one of my favorites. He was like sort of the one that was like, there's more to just like painting these things. And like, you know, he did a painting and it's called Pure Beauty. And I don't know if you guys could guess what's on this white canvas, but it's black text that just says Pure Beauty. And it's amazing. I mean, that like, it changed my artistic genetics, I feel like, when I saw that. So, and the reason that I like that so much is because that text, and you were talking before about activation, you need the viewer to activate that. And once the viewer activates the text by reading it, it integrates them into the experience, right? So like, you need that viewer to read that text to activate the whole thing. And then they become invested just by reading it. And it doesn't matter how simple it is, you know, they bring that to it. And I really love that. I really love how like there's an activation element to it. Like it becomes this like push button mechanism to the experience, and the human, the art, the space is this mechanism as one. They're all like sort of like parts in this really, really nice machine, you know, which is the experience. That being said, the vinyl And the flatness, the like ultra flatness of the vinyl is sort of the same thing in the sense that like it's just this other component in this experience. And even if you're talking about the flatness of painting, there is nothing like vinyl on the wall. And there's something about artists too, whether they see the title of the show going up or the absolute precision. We made jokes last night about how like nobody wants to touch the vinyl. Few artists want to touch the vinyl because it's so mechanized and so technical, and you could fuck it up so fast. It's terrifying. Like, I want no part of it, which is another reason why I'm so grateful for you guys and all the things that you helped me do, because I had this idea and I put this thing on you. I dropped this thing in your lap. You're like, what about all the vinyl? And you're like, I got a guy for that. And he did great at it. So, the ultra flatness is just even like another layer beyond the flatness of the painting that like is just another component of this, like the mechanism that is the experience. And so the same thing as with the text. It's just, the fact that you can activate it as a reader is exciting to me. It's an experience, and then it becomes an experience rather than this like thing you view and then you walk away. Also, I will add, I started in like 2012. I was doing these text paintings, and like I would do this like text and duct tape, and I would not space anything, and I would basically describing the painting, which is like harken back to the John Baldessari stuff. He does this painting called Pure Beauty, and it's fucking awesome. It's really genius, and because he distills what you want out of a painting and puts it into text and makes you experience it, but it slows people down. There's something about art that has become sort of this pedestrian thing, and it's like, oh, you have this art show, how nice. But you do these text things, and it was a real practical sort of tool to slow people down and just stop them a little bit just by the act of reading. There's another layer of like, you're forced to spend time with it. Even if it's like, oh, The Giant, it's not like it takes you an incredible amount of time to read that, but like it does take time to read it, and it I don't know if forcing is the word, I never want that, but it definitely heavily suggests you should stop and read this to fully get it, and people want that. They really want to get things, and I think that that's another interesting element in the art experience. And you can offer that to people, and that's a conversation between me, the artist, and the audience to sort of, this like call and response thing is interesting to me. Big smile.
So I think it's interesting that Samuel Beckett was a writer and got some words going on.
Yeah.
And how they relate to your neon pieces, which become like typographic in a way.
Yeah.
They remind me of dingbats,
Yeah, sure, like a hieroglyphic kind of thing, like a symbol.
Right, hieroglyphics, and so they become that, and they also become something else. Like I keep seeing the handle on those tires, like you're gonna pick it up and walk away with it.
Yeah,
okay. I can't unsee that, and then the smile and the chopsticks, and so there's so really typographic symbols.
Yeah.
All throughout everything. I think that.
Yeah, and if I could just add to it, I think when you also look at text as like sort of this visual thing, and you take the language meaning, and you just take it as a symbol, right? Like, because when you get into like semiotics and all that stuff, it's like you have language as this formal thing that's associated with meaning, but when you kind of focus on the formal part of it, like, okay, so I have this really weird experience when I was a little kid, and I remember the road that I was turning on. It was the Morgan Highway going down Grove Street. I was in the car with Mom, and I just remember being a weird kid in the back seat and saying the word strawberry over and over and over and over. And I don't know if you've ever done this before, but if you say a word over and over and over and over, it just becomes this like formal noise kind of thing, and it loses its meaning, and you have this really like sort of weird experience like when you disassociate it from the meaning, because we're so used to reading words while of course like I can read, and then I think also having kids now too, like seeing my son just draw letters as like a formal thing. It's a really interesting thing when you just sort of like isolate it as this like picture, or like even hieroglyphics, or like the dingbat thing, right? Like in the text, you're like, also who uses dingbat? What is that for? But it's interesting because it reduces it down to just like a visual. And I think that that's also interesting, like even just the form of a letter, if you sort of remove it from like you know, the semiotic and language realm and just look at it as a form, you know, all of a sudden you're into this like interesting territory where you're like, I've disconnected it from language and now I'm just looking at it as a formal thing. And I think it's a great tool to use in paintings as well too. And I think it's a great observation, you know? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you.
Well, I just have to know what inspired you to make cinder blocks out of wood.
So,
when was that like, oh, well, that's what I'm doing?
Well, yeah, so I think, you know, I think it's another, and it's really interesting too because not everybody gets it. They see the cinder block and they're like, oh, it's a cinder block. And I'm like, yeah, but cinder's like, you know, like cement mixed with rock. It's not a cinder block. I you know, I'm like sort of really like the everyday too, and like I like the idea of elevating the everyday and everyday objects and things like that. And I think, you know, I was doing duct tape paintings for a while, and I think that's another sort of way to, you know, make, you know, if you're dealing with the mundane, you have like a really good opportunity to sort of create magic, you know, and I really like how, you know, it's kind of a fine material, you know, it's a really beautiful object, you know, like I want to make furniture, I want to make end tables, I want block end tables that are like slightly larger, and I just like how it's an otherwise utilitarian thing, and you remove it, and I guess, you know, if we're gonna like sort of, if there's like a thesis to all of these things that I do, I like sort of taking things, removing it from where it should be and putting it over here and seeing what happens, you know, like there's like a little rebellion in that, and saying that like, okay, like here's this like block that like everybody's going to overlook. I mean, look at all the construction. My God, how many blocks are going in that building over there? You can't possibly think that those blocks are important. But if you hand make them out of wood, then something exciting happens, and you sort of take what would otherwise, you know, be bitching and complaining about all the development in Sarasota, and you take like one tiny little part of that otherwise boring, complaining experience, and like you make it out of this like fine material, out of like wood, and like you make it beautiful. Like that's exciting to me. And now it becomes this other thing. Now it's this like sort of character in this other world, and that's again like the fact. So that's narrative, you know what I mean? Like that in and of itself, that process creates a narrative. You know, it's like, oh, I'm going to make these otherwise, you know, mundane things out of fine material, and then it's like it has its own story in its conception. So.
Well,
Well, it seems like the goal at some level is to make not something specific happen with your audience, but anything happen. Or, you know, are you saying, oh, what I want to happen in your mind is this? And sometimes I'm getting this sense that you're saying, no, not that specific. I just want to fuck with you.
A little bit, yes, a little bit, yeah, in a great way, in a productive, welcoming way, yeah, in a friendly way, yeah.
And then the experience walking in is I'd say like, you know, Andre the Giant and Samuel Beckett, you know, well, of course, you know, at first, you know, think, oh, yeah, that's a joke. Yeah. That's so random. It's so absurd. And then the other side of me, the storyteller wants to say, I got to make sense of this stupid shit.
Sure, yeah.
Damn it.
I assure you, I take fucking with you very seriously. So yeah, if I could encapsulate, yeah.
You know, it's like, the neon reappear. Oh. Neon's the God showing up.
Yeah.
So, you know, or, you know, but then it all seems so, well, like I say, gets back to is, hey, if anything happens, that's better than nothing.
Well, sure. No, there's no doubt. Now, you know, I mean, to leave it so, you know, and that's another thing, like fucking with someone is a way of engaging with them. You know what I mean? Now, to say, you know, I mean, I do very much care what you experience. You know, it's an offering. It's very, but like, you know, I feel like what I wanted to avoid with what I was putting out there, like, it's a really delicate balance, right? Like, you don't want to impose a certain narrative, and that was the thing that I sort of resented with painters of my camp. the traditional illustrative painters that were painting pictures that served another story. It felt like an imposition to me, basically what I wanted to do my best to create a set of circumstances for you to work within. Now, there's a parameter for sure, because if it was anything, I could dump a pile of garbage on the floor in front of you and be like, well, what do you think? And that's bullshit, you know what I mean? But I mean, this takes a lot of work. So to say that it's completely open is not true. However, I don't want to impose, and I don't want to say that there's one way to look at it. And you could look at it a completely different way that I look at it, and I definitely think that's something to be celebrated. But there is a practical amount of work involved in presenting the parameters to you. So it's a set of circumstances, right? So my offer to the viewer is a set of circumstances. It's like, here's all of these elements that mean something to me in a certain way. Like, they create a certain picture to me, and as the artist, you get this sort of feeling, you get this sort of thing that you're chasing, right? That's the challenge as an artist, is I feel like it should be a certain way. I can't put words to it, so I'm going to try to put it together. And almost 100% of the time, what you think originally and what happens is different. But it's also the craftsmanship is important. So I guess I want to make that clear that the craftsmanship, the building of it is still really important. So it's not so wide open that I haven't taken care in presenting you these sort of characters or these circumstances. But yeah, I mean, I celebrate the fact that you experience it one way and you're going to experience it another way, so on and so forth. I think that that's necessary, and it's a challenge as the artist to allow that, but also say, I'm the professional here. I'll make the objects, and the craftsmanship is important, and what you view and the objects that you experience have also been built with care. So yeah, it's a challenge. You want to leave it wide open, but at the same time have control over it.
If you care, makes us give you more credibility, you're thinking, or you've earned your way into our mind.
Yeah, of course, and I hope that. I mean, that's quite literally what I'm trying to do, because honestly, we've all had that experience of either loving something or feeling alienated by art. And I never want to alienate. There's certain things that I really, really enjoy, certain art that people still argue with me about, or the Michael Heiser stuff. He dug this big hole in the ground, and it's just well, what the fuck is this? And it's you don't understand. It's amazing, and that's okay that I think it's amazing, and someone else thinks it's dumb. That's okay too. But that hole that was dug in the ground was dug with care, and there's something about any kind of craftsmanship and anything that's built with the human hand, and I think that's super relevant right now. It's such an offering to other humans, and the fact that you could sit and not like it is sort of a privilege too, so I don't know, again, there's a delicate balance of leaving it open, but at the same time being there's also control here,
I had a follow-up question. So you were kind of talking about painting things over, and so instead of what's your favorite thing, what's the thing that's closest in this room to being painted over, and why?
What do you mean painted over?
You're going to get rid of
reusing the canvas.
You're going to get rid of it? Or anything.
Oh, in here? I don't know. I mean, honestly, to be totally honest with you, I really, really like all these paintings. I mean, they're not, I really have to, when you're going to paint over something, you're this is fucking garbage. I painted over it immediately. You know what I mean? It's not a big deal when you think something's garbage. So so in this room specifically, I don't think I'm going to paint over it. I really like all of these paintings, and honestly, my favorites change throughout. The discarding of things is a pretty quick experience. I don't really labor over what I'm going to paint over. It's pretty quick. I'm garbage. Yeah. But yeah, I like the show a lot. I really, really do like the show. Yeah.
Well, we like it too.
Yeah.
Great, thank
I
you so
think it
much.
looks
Yeah. It was really great. Yeah, I mean, it was a pleasure to make all this work and do these things, and you guys were so great. And, yeah.
Well, it's been such a pleasure getting to know you and your art and the story of Andre. And
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what a
Samuel.
weird
Thank you so much, Russ.
Yeah, you got it. Thank you so much for having me. And for the art center, 100 years.